So like I said, we're going to get right into it very quickly because we have a very short amount of time left, but it's creating welcoming classrooms for immigrant students. I'm going to skip the introductions because I feel like after today, I have gotten the chance to get to know a lot of you. But I will say the last thing, if you could do, just type in the chat box in the left, something that someone has done that made you feel welcomed. And this could be in the classroom, in a school context, but it could also be at your house or at someone else's house, rather. Something that someone has done that made you feel welcome. Learned my name. Asked me about my family. Yeah, shook hands, said welcome. Brought food, showed interest in my ideas, my language, made eye contact, offered chocolate. I love that. Asked my opinion. Great. So these are certain things. They took an interest in you. They asked you questions. They acknowledged you as a human being with your own unique identity and story to tell. Smiled. Yes, very important. So having that in mind, I'm going to share just a little bit about my background, just to show you a little bit of that certain degree of personal disclosure, which I think Federico talked about, which is I started out in 2013 working with immigrant students, partnering between the University of Maryland and Northwestern High School in Montgomery County, Maryland, where the undergraduate students mentored the high school students in creating their own poems and stories, and we called it Postcards from Our Country. And I share that with you as part of the background that brings me here with you today. I also have been a high school educator, English teacher, public school settings, and I taught mostly in heterogeneous classrooms where about a third of my student populations were immigrants, right here in DC public schools, before going to the American Immigration Council. So I'm going to share with you some of the kind of tips and activities that I've done so that hopefully the goal is that maybe you will be inspired and want to try some of them in your classroom. So how do you create welcoming classrooms for immigrant students is our big topic question. And a lot of you spent some time on the Padlet, answering this. And I just want to take a few moments to acknowledge that because you guys had great ideas there, and I wrote a few of them down in case you haven't been able to look at them. Building student trust, smiling at the door, using multiple languages, engaging parents early and often, doing presentations on cultures and holidays, having peer interviews. I really like that one. Using alliteration to get a student's name correct, like Lovely Lucy was an example, and using student notebooks as well. So there are tons of ideas up on there that would be, a lot of them are great like icebreaker activities. So definitely take a look at that Padlet when you have a chance. Today I'm going to go over a few key points in theory, just very briefly, because we've had a lot of that today. But background to sort of my practical activities are these 4 points. That 1, you establish a safe, welcoming space. 2, that you encourage self-expression to build confidence and a sense of belonging. 3, provide opportunities to collaborate and learn together. And lastly, 4, have flexible and creative lessons and programs to support families and students. So I'm hoping that these those are the key points in theory, and here they are in practice. Some ways, obviously this is a short presentation, it's not exhaustive list at all. Some things that you can do if you don't already do some of them, and I'm sure some of you do based on your comments. But key points in practice is 1, using low-risk free writes. 2, getting your names right. 3, collaborate on poems or story sketching using word clusters in 1 or 2 languages. Displaying maps of an immigration journeys. Having diverse books in your classroom library, and using diverse media to tell stories. And lastly, to make time for storytelling. So I'm going to go through these sometimes with student examples, sometimes not, in order to show you how they might work. And then at the end of the presentation, I want to give you guys a couple of minutes to reflect and see, you guys are teachers, many of you are, and how can you adapt these activities in your own classroom practices. And and I'm just being mindful that as teachers, you guys have a lot on your plate and a lot of demands being made on you. These are some things that you can do on a daily basis, particularly 1 and 2 and 5 and 7, which we're going to spend some time on. And that's it. Okay, so free writes. A free writes. How many people do free writes? You can go ahead and say, yes, I do free writes in the chat box. Okay, so a fair amount of you. That's good. So a lot of you guys know what the routine is. It's a short span of nonstop pen on the page writing. I recommend 7 minutes to start. I'm an English language teacher by background, right? So 7 minutes to start, 2 minutes for them to just kind of wander and kind of look around, and then 5 minutes of writing. It's usually what happens, right? Sometimes I make it a race for them, and if they get stuck, you just start again. Include poetry, yes, definitely. Journaling often. I used to do that as a way to start my class. I know some schools, they have particular activities to start your class, but I used to do that. Students would come in and they just settle in. They knew exactly what to do. They would just go down and start writing. The prompt would be on the board. And you can use prompts that encourage students to tell their stories. Okay, like I am the one who, and then they write from that sentence starter, or I wish, or I'm from. And then at the end, if there's, given the day's schedule, there may not always be time for this, but encourage read alouds. So having a student read their own work, or having a student next to them read that person's work, and having read backs. And by read backs, I mean, so say a student reads a bit of what they wrote. The only response in the classroom is repeating back a line verbatim that they heard and that they liked. No commentary at all. You're not commenting on the quality of the writing or what a student did, but maybe something that just struck them. And just knowing that that student, that his or her voice was heard, that he or she is empowered to write, is actually really powerful, and I encourage you to try it. Here's an example of a student sample of a poem. It ended up being a poem of I'm From. So using that I am from where everybody runs for the presidency, where the capital is dry like the Sahara Desert, the houses are made of dirt, the schools are covered by trash and grasses, students wear the same clothes from the beginning of the year to the end. I am from where rebellions and robbery are a part of the government job, where when it is deep dark at night, it is lighter in the president's palace, where water is able for 6 hours in a day. So I'm just going to pause there just to let you guys know that this is the kind of writing that could come from having to write from a prompt. And chances are, what's so powerful about this kind of activity is that you probably, the person sitting next to that student for the past couple of weeks probably never knew where they actually came from, right? They never knew these little details of their lives. So free writes are a great way, and having a notebook is a great way to expose students to really taking ownership of their writing. Getting names right, this was mentioned. Names often, people's names often have a story that goes along with it. So it's just very interesting to learn that, what that origin may be. Pronunciation can have a huge impact on a child, even if they don't appear to be bothered by a mispronunciation of it. There's chances are you may be the first person who really sat down and said, hey, am I pronouncing your name correctly? Or I think I'm mispronouncing it. And that is going back to that vulnerability and that personal disclosure, right? And saying, hey, I may have been messing up your name all year. Or I don't think I got it quite right, 3 years ago when you're graduating now. It doesn't, as long as you say something and do something, because I think this goes back to, I'm not sure, but I'm sort of relating it back to that implicit bias. But, whether you intend to or not, what you are communicating to a student when you don't get their name right is that it's foreign, it's weird, it's different, you are different, and it's maybe not worth my time to get it right. And I know that that's not what anyone wants to communicate. There's, anyone who's a teacher does not want to communicate that. So consider it as a growth opportunity, right? I also give the tip about, and I see there's some more tips being offered in the chat box, which is great. If you have a lot of students, like I had a third of my students whose names were rather foreign sounding to me, sometimes I wrote a pronunciation key in the actual attendance chart that I swear only I could understand, but just do that on day one of this year. And you'll be less likely having to, ask them to pronounce their name for you again. But, get it right is basically, it's worth your time. A poem or story sketch is another idea. It's based on activity to try. It's based on the idea that words are materials. You can take a group of words, usually about 4, and develop them into combinations that feel like poems or become stories. They can express things that are, word images can allow us to say things that are sometimes difficult to express. So you can even, I'm going to give you an example to make it clearer, but say you have like 4 words and it's on a theme like home country. You can choose a theme or not. And you have home, money, books, and purple are your words. And the students have to either individually or collaboratively come together and write a story or poem about that. And what could happen is this example. Fish, cheap, street, and time were the words that were in the sketch. And so I'm so famous in Cameroon, you can find me everywhere. You can buy me at the seashore, anywhere you can find fresh fish. Remember, I'm near there, straight out of the sea, and it goes on. But the interesting thing is too, is of course, the student next to this girl that wrote it, of course, had a poem or story sketch that was, fish, cheap, street, and time. They relate, but they don't at the same time. And of course, it can bring along a good way to create some community in the classroom and to get students to share their stories, right? Which is, we've been hearing in the previous modules, is a really great way to break down implicit biases, to avoid stereotyping, and of course, to create a welcoming classroom. Another thing you can do is to provide a map of immigration journeys. And this one picture is from the President Lincoln's Cottage Museum here in Washington, D.C., which if you're ever in this area, it's a little known hidden gem here in the city. But they have an immigration exhibit. And this way you can kind of trace each other's immigration journeys and see where people came from. Now, as I say this, I think with older students, you can, in this case, use you can see the different colors of rubber bands in this case. Those all represent different push-pull factors, like people who come here out of force, or people who come here because they have family here. And so it acknowledges the different push-pull factors, that not all of which are this great story of I've come to America, the land of opportunity. It may also be the case I'm fleeing from my home country because I'm afraid of being there. And so it can open up that space. Now, I think what you have to caution yourself is that when you open up that space, you have to be cognizant that some people, may not want to share that information with, and shouldn't be made to, quite frankly. So you need to be aware of that. As well. So maybe it's anonymous. Maybe it's, maybe you use historical figures and you use a map of immigration journeys that way, or just make it voluntary and just have it in your classroom somewhere. That's one. Another idea is, of course, and this came up earlier in the chat boxes, but I'm just seeing a comment. Many of my K-3 students don't know what country they come from. Right, and some people don't either. So again, like if you had that activity, you could just make it involuntary in that case. You could have a research project. Again, it's acknowledging, right? Particularly, say if you have an African American students that came here as a result of slavery, it's acknowledging that yes, this happened. It's having that important, difficult discussion in your classroom, which needs to happen, right? So a diverse books library as well. So if I think one of the ways that I go about doing it is I kind of look at myself as a student. I say, okay, if I were a student in your school, would I be able to find multiple texts with reflections of myself those are what we would call mirrors, and multiple texts that serve as windows into the worlds of others, right? So mirrors, do I see myself reflected? And then windows, do I see worlds of others being reflected in the books? And if the answer is no, and it often is more like it can be improved, then consider this checklist, which I really like. Lee and Low Books is a great children's books publisher of diverse books, and they have a checklist, 8 steps to creating a diverse book collection. And they ask you these, different kinds of questions, like, do you have LGBTQ represented within your book collection? Do you have differentially abled protagonists in your collection? Do you have accurate portrayals of ethnic and racial groups? And also with that, are they only doing one thing? Are all the African-American all the African-American protagonists somehow connected with slavery in the books that you have? Well, that's not a full picture, right? Or are all the Latino protagonists associated with immigration? You want to make sure that you're showing people in their full humanity as much as possible in the books that you choose. Oh, and bilingual books, absolutely. Bilingual books, trying to bring in multiple languages, and letting them know that that's okay. And do consider like online funding methods, GoFundMe, reaching out to librarians for recommendations as well, because obviously they have a wealth of information in case you don't have a lot of funds for your books. Also, this summer, if you go to I just went to a used bookstore the other week, and there were tons available in the children's section. So, you can beef up your library this summer as well. And then of course, using diverse storytelling mediums. There's interviews and recordings. I know that someone mentioned that in the Padlet. There's also podcasting, which students would get really excited about, digital storytelling, and of course the old-fashioned handmade drawings. Now we have a couple of lessons that are on sharemylesson.com. Podcasting immigration experience, in case you're wondering how to do that. There's a great tutorial on how to do that, crossing borders with digital storytelling, which I presented on last year, and you're going to hear some 2 more projects tomorrow that deal with it, so you'll have a lot of ideas there. And telling the family story is a great lesson on just the colorful illustrative drawings, usually from elementary school students, and they interview an immigrant and they tell their story through crayons, and then you're able to make a book out of it. So all of those are available on sharemylesson.com, and I believe that's also going to be on the website as well. And lastly, just incorporating the different uses of technology is really going to expand sort of your buy-in with students sometimes. Also cell phones, a lot of these have for digital storytelling on your cell phone, you can get Little Bird Tales is a great medium for K through 5. WeVideo is a great medium for 7 through 12. And those are free and they're on their phones. So if that's an issue, know that there's a lot of, and Storybird, yeah, that's another one. Know that that's an option. Okay, so making time for storytelling, I think that's kind of been underlying theme in the day. And I think it speaks to these quotes too. Stories can conquer fear, they can make the heart bigger. You're not alone in the classroom. There are many stories out there that you can tap into to teach social justice and to engender a better cultural understanding. And I've learned that people will forget what you said, forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. By Dr. Maya Angelou. And I think stories have that power to do that. So here's our chat room reflection. I know it's very short, but how might you adapt one of the practical welcoming strategies for immigrant students in your classroom? What outcomes do you intend to achieve, and what challenges do you foresee? So I do give a recap of the different strategies we talked about today: free writing, getting names right, using a poem story sketch, having immigration maps, diverse books, diverse storytelling mediums. So how might you adapt one of these practical welcoming strategies for the immigrant students in your classroom? And what outcomes would you achieve? And what challenges do you foresee? Yes, I was just floating around through all the different chat rooms, and they're really, really great. I'm going to share a couple of ideas. On the 6 through 12 chat room, there was think, pair, sharing, interviews. So the interview with the other student next to them, and they think, they pair, they share out loud with the general class. They have you could rewrite in your native language and then translate it into English. Another writing prompt could be my name means. I like that one. There was a little talk about using maps, not only when you talk about immigration stories, but then looking into the history of those particular immigration journeys, teaching geography and history, obviously, at the same time. I thought poem and story sketching, they thought it was a great idea to use, this is a different room, but to use to teach the vocab that they're trying to teach, and use poem and story sketching for that. I have done that. That works well. Having a jar of student-generated prompts, great idea. Having a poster board of welcoming sites, a poster board of welcoming signs. Can't read my own handwriting. Sorry about that. You can also model free writing, which I didn't talk about, but is very important so that they see you writing, and even sharing your work increases that vulnerability. For me, in my case, if I were to free write in Spanish, not my native language, and I shared that with students, they would probably think it was pretty funny. And that could take the pressure off of the writing piece. And the challenge, of course, is getting, some challenges are mentioned, having lower level students, lower level ELL learners, how are they going to free write? Well, you could also encourage them to use, their own native language to free write, and then doing that one day and then translating to English on the next. So great ideas here, and I'm really happy to be a part of this again today.